There is a moment at the 2013 Paris Air Show that aviation journalists present still describe with a specific mixture of awe and unease. A Sukhoi Su-35S takes off from the runway, climbs steeply, and then does something that defies the intuitive physics of fixed-wing flight. It pitches its nose past the vertical, not through it, past it, until the aircraft is pointing backward along its own flight path, engines screaming, maintaining forward momentum, while the nose sweeps through angles that no conventional aerodynamic surface should be able to sustain. The aircraft does not fall out of the sky. It does not stall. It completes the maneuver and accelerates away as if nothing unusual has occurred. The Western engineers watching from the crowd were not entertained. They were concerned. Because what the Su-35 had just demonstrated was not a party trick for an air show audience. It was a combat capability with a very specific tactical implication. In a close-range air combat engagement, when both aircraft have bled their energy down to low speed, and the fight becomes a question of who can point their nose, and therefore their missiles, at the enemy first, the Su-35 can point at you before you can point at it. Every time, without exception. But here is the question nobody asks loudly enough. Does that actually matter anymore? In an era of stealth aircraft that can engage you from 150 kilometers without you ever knowing they were there, is the most maneuverable non-stealth fighter in the world a masterpiece or an expensive mistake? That question does not have a simple answer. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why. We are covering everything. The design lineage that nearly died with the Soviet Union, full technical specifications, and what every number actually means in combat. The Irbis-E radar that NATO engineers lose sleep over. The complete weapons suite, including the missile that has already changed air warfare over Ukraine. Every variant. The export deals that reveal exactly how the world values this aircraft. The combat record from Syria to a historic shootdown in 2024. And a completely honest assessment of where the Su-35 stands in 2025. Its genuine strengths and its real, unresolvable vulnerabilities. Stay with me. Here is something that almost no one tells you about the Su-35. The aircraft you just watched, defying physics at that Paris Air Show, should not exist. Not because it was impossible to build, but because it was cancelled. Defunded by a collapsing empire. Left without money, without production orders, and without a country to fly for. The fact that the Su-35S eventually entered frontline service in 2014 is not a story of linear Soviet engineering progress. It is a story of survival, of an aircraft concept that refused to die even when the state that created it did. To understand why, you have to spend 60 seconds on the Su-27, and the Su-27 deserves those 60 seconds. Because without understanding how genuinely exceptional it was, you cannot understand why the Su-35 mattered so much. The Sukhoi Su-27 entered Soviet Air Defense Forces service in 1984 after a development program that nearly destroyed itself. The original T-10 prototype, which flew in 1977, was so fundamentally flawed, unstable, aerodynamically compromised, dangerously underpowered relative to its design requirements, that chief designer Mikhail Semenov made a decision that requires a specific kind of courage in any engineering organization and a remarkable kind of courage in a Soviet one. He scrapped the entire design and started over, completely. The revised T-10s that emerged was a different aircraft. A blended wing-body configuration generating lift across the entire fuselage. Natural aerodynamic agility requiring no computer augmentation to be extraordinary. Range so exceptional it could fly from Moscow to the English Channel and back without refueling. When Western intelligence analysts finally understood what the Soviets had produced, the assessment was precise and uncomfortable. This was world-class. Not good for a Soviet design. Actually world-class. Now hold that image, this extraordinary aircraft, and understand that in 1982, while it was still being put into production, Sukhoi was already designing something better. The Soviet Council of Ministers formally instructed the Design Bureau in December 1983 to develop an improved Su-27 variant. The goal was not incremental improvement, it was transformation, multi-role capability, a new phased array radar that could attack ground targets as well as hunt aircraft, canard foreplanes for enhanced maneuverability, upgraded engines, in-flight refueling, and a glass cockpit. Take the best air superiority fighter in the Soviet inventory and give it the ability to do everything. The first prototype flew on 28th of June 1988, piloted by Oleg Tso, and the design team immediately discovered something they had not planned for. The canards added purely to compensate for the weight of the new nose radar, a structural decision, not an aerodynamic one, turned out to be one of the most significant accidental aerodynamic discoveries in the program. They redirected airflow at high angles of attack in ways that allowed the aircraft to sustain maneuvers the original Su-27 could not safely enter. Engineers who added weight to the nose accidentally made the aircraft more dangerous in combat. That kind of serendipity is rare in aviation history. Then the Soviet Union collapsed. The funding evaporated. Only 12 aircraft were completed, used primarily as test beds. One of them, fitted with experimental three-dimensional thrust vectoring nozzles, was redesignated the Su-37 and became a legend on the International Air Show circuit for its ability to perform maneuvers at angles that left Western engineers visibly uncomfortable. But it remained a demonstrator, not a production fighter. The concept was alive. The program was dead. In 2003, with Russia's economy recovering and the Air Force's Su-27 fleet aging dangerously, Sukhoi initiated a second attempt. This time, the philosophy changed completely. The canards came off, eliminated, because three-dimensional thrust vectoring could replace their aerodynamic contribution without their weight penalty. The structure was rebuilt with lighter materials and composites. The avionics were redesigned from scratch, incorporating 15 years of lessons from Su-30 export programs. And on 19 February 2008, Sergei Bogdan took the first Su-35S prototype airborne for a 55-minute maiden flight. The aircraft that should have died in 1991 had arrived. And it had arrived with something to prove. Let me give you the specifications, but I am not going to read you a datasheet. I am going to tell you what each number actually means when this aircraft is trying to kill something. The Su-35S is 21.9 meters long. That is longer than a standard semi-trailer truck. Wingspan, 15.3 meters. Height, 5.9 meters. It sits on a ramp with a physical presence that smaller fighters simply do not have, and that size is not aesthetics. It is fuel capacity. The Su-35 carries approximately 11,500 kilograms of internal fuel, more than the entire maximum takeoff weight of an early block F-16. That fuel translates directly into range, and range in a fighter is a form of power that popular aviation coverage almost entirely ignores. We will come back to exactly why it matters when we discuss the comparisons. Empty weight is approximately 18,400 kilograms. Maximum takeoff weight reaches 34,500 kilograms. At that weight, what comes next should be physically impossible. It is not. The power plants are two Saturn AL-41F1S turbofans, a highly evolved descendant of the AL-31F that powered earlier flanker variants, closely related to the engine fitted to Russia's Su-57, fifth-generation fighter. Each produces 142 kilonewtons of thrust with full afterburner. Combined, 284 kilonewtons, approximately 63,900 pounds of force, at a realistic combat weight of around 25,000 kilograms, with 50% fuel and a standard air-to-air weapons load. The Su-35S has a thrust-to-weight ratio that exceeds 1.0. In practical terms, the aircraft can accelerate vertically, point the nose straight up, light both afterburners, and the Su-35 climbs faster than gravity pulls it down. That is not common. Even among dedicated air superiority fighters, it is exceptional. But the detail about those engines that changes everything about how this aircraft fights is the nozzle system. Each nozzle can physically tilt independently, and the installation is canted at an angle that allows simultaneous vectoring in pitch, roll, and yaw by commanding each engine differently. Full three-dimensional thrust vectoring. This is the system behind that Paris Air Show maneuver. The aircraft can redirect its thrust to point the nose at any target in the hemisphere, regardless of where it is actually going. At the precise moment in a close-range engagement, when both aircraft have bled to low speed and the fight becomes a pointing competition, the Su-35 wins that competition. The debate about whether that matters in modern air combat. We will have that debate. But first, understand that the capability is real. Maximum speed at altitude, Mach 255, approximately 2,400 kilometers per hour. At low level, approximately 1,400 kilometers per hour. Service ceiling, 18,000 meters, 59,000 feet. These are the expected numbers for a modern flanker derivative. The number that surprises most people is this one. The Su-35S can sustain flight above Mach 1.1 without afterburner. Supercruise. Most fighters can achieve supersonic speed. Very few can sustain it without the enormous fuel consumption of afterburner. The practical consequence is that in Su-35, that supercruises to a combat area arrives with a full fuel state and a full weapons capability. An aircraft that sprinted to the same point on afterburner is already calculating when it needs to turn for home. In a sustained conflict where sortie rate matters as much as peak performance, that difference is operationally significant. Combat range on a standard air superiority mission, approximately 1,600 kilometers. With 3 external fuel tanks, 3,600 kilometers. Ferry range without weapons, over 4,500 kilometers. To understand what those numbers mean strategically, and Su-35s based in Western Russia can patrol airspace over targets that fighters flying from Poland or Romania cannot reach without aerial refueling. Range is leverage. The Su-35s has more of it than almost anything flying today without a tanker attached. 12 external weapons hardpoints. Maximum external payload, 8,000 kilograms. For a single-seat fighter, that payload is extraordinary, comparable to some dedicated strike aircraft. It means the Su-35 can simultaneously carry enough air-to-air missiles for a sustained beyond visual range engagement and enough precision ground attack munitions for a deep strike mission without choosing between them. Now we reach the system that genuinely concerns NATO electronic warfare planners. Not the thrust vectoring, spectacular at air shows, but conditional on surviving long enough to use it. What keeps radar engineers awake is the Irbis-E. Because the Irbis-E is a radar that should not be able to do what it demonstrably does. Here is the context that makes it remarkable. Since the 1990s, Western radar development has followed a clear trajectory toward AESA, active electronically scanned array systems that replace a single powerful transmitter with thousands of tiny solid-state transmitter-receiver modules. The result is a radar that changes its frequency, waveform, and beam direction thousands of times per second, making it extremely resistant to jamming and nearly impossible to detect passively. The F-22 has an AESA. The F-35 has an AESA. The Eurofighter's Captor-E is an AESA. The Western assumption was straightforward. Any adversary radar that is not AESA is therefore limited, jammable, and detectable. The Irbis-E is not an AESA. It is a hybrid passive phased array, a large single antenna whose beam is steered electronically within a cone, with a mechanical actuator providing additional physical sweep beyond that cone. By Western theoretical standards, it should be less capable, more vulnerable to jamming, more easily detected through its own emissions. In some of those respects, the theory is correct, but where the Irbis-E ruptures the expected pattern is in raw transmitted power. The Irbis-E's transmitter produces 20 kilowatts of peak power, roughly 10 times the peak power of many comparable Western PESA systems, and competitive with early AESA designs despite using older transmitter architecture. It is not subtle. It is not sophisticated in the frequency agility sense. It simply hits harder than anything comparable on the planet. The result? NIIP's stated detection range for a target with a 3 square meter radar cross-section, approximately the size of a fighter-sized aircraft with some degree of radar management, is 400 kilometers in narrow field of view search mode. 200 kilometers in wide area search. The distance from London to Paris is approximately 340 kilometers. The Irbis-E can detect a standard fighter aircraft at a distance greater than the English Channel crossing, before the target enters the operational area. Before the pilot has any reason to believe he is being watched. The antenna houses 1,772 individual radiating elements and scans electronically within a 60-degree cone from bore sight. The mechanical actuator adds a further 60 degrees of physical rotation in azimuth and 120 degrees in elevation. Combined effect, the Su-35 can track targets at up to 120 degrees off the aircraft's nose, well into the rear hemisphere, without turning the aircraft. A pilot who believes he has broken away from an Su-35 and is no longer being tracked may still be precisely centered on the Irbis-E's display. That awareness, or the lack of it, can be the difference between living and not. The radar tracks 30 airborne targets simultaneously and can guide weapons against 8 of them at once. In ground mapping mode, it provides synthetic aperture radar imagery while continuing to scan for airborne threats, genuine multitasking at a level that most tactical radars cannot match. And when radar alone is not enough, the OLS-35 optoelectronic system ahead of the cockpit provides passive infrared search and track out to 90 kilometers, detecting aircraft by the heat signature of their engines without emitting a single radar photon. An adversary relying entirely on radar warning receivers to detect the Su-35's attention receives no warning from the OLS-35 at all. The Su-35 sees without being seen, Is it perfect? No, its PESA architecture cannot match the instantaneous frequency agility of a modern AESA in a truly dense electronic warfare environment. Its emissions are more detectable to a sensitive passive receiver than an AESA's would be. Against a fully equipped F-35 operating with its complete electronic warfare suite, the Irbis-E faces a harder problem than its raw power implies. But against anything that is not a stealth platform, the vast majority of real-world opponents this aircraft will ever face, the Irbis-E is one of the most capable operational fighter radars in service anywhere on Earth. The Su-35S carries an internal GH-30 single-barrel, 30mm cannon with 150 rounds. Proven, reliable, deadly at close range. But the cannon is the least interesting weapon on this aircraft. What defines the Su-35's tactical threat profile is its missile suite, and one specific missile has already rewritten the rules of air combat over Ukraine in ways that no one fully anticipated. For close-range engagements, the R-73E and its improved R-74M successor, highly agile infrared-guided missiles with helmet-mounted sight cueing. The pilot looks at a target anywhere in his wide field of view. The helmet cues the missile seeker in that direction. The missile launches and immediately turns to pursue a target the aircraft was never pointing at. This makes the Su-35 dangerous at close range in ways that raw hardpoint counts do not capture. The engagement geometry no longer requires the pilot to point the aircraft at the enemy before firing. For medium-range engagements, the R-77-1 active radar homing missile, NATO designation AA-12 Adder, with a range of approximately 110 kilometers. The R-77M upgrade extends effective range and improves resistance to electronic countermeasures. For extended medium range, the R-27ER provides approximately 130 kilometers of engagement range against non-maneuvering targets. And then there is the R-37M. This is the weapon that changes the conversation entirely. The R-37M is a very long-range air-to-air missile, NATO designation AA-13 Axehead, with a stated maximum range of approximately 300 kilometers and a terminal speed of approximately Mach 6. It was originally designed to destroy AWACS aircraft and aerial tankers, the high-value, non-maneuvering assets that give modern air forces their operational coherence, from distances at which the target's own fighter escort could not possibly intercept the launch aircraft in time. Over Ukraine, Russian Su-35S aircraft have employed R-37M missiles against Ukrainian aircraft operating well behind the front line, at altitudes and distances that Ukrainian pilots previously considered safe by a substantial margin. The practical consequence has been Ukrainian MiG-29s and Su-27s destroyed at ranges where their crews had no effective warning of the incoming weapon. A missile traveling at Mach 6 covers 300 kilometers in approximately 3 minutes and 30 seconds. At that closure rate, even if the radar warning receiver triggers at the last possible moment, the options available to the pilot are extremely limited. For ground attack, the Su-35 carries the KH-29 family of laser and television-guided missiles, the KH-31 anti-radiation and anti-ship missile, the KH-59 family of standoff attack munitions with ranges exceeding 100 kilometers, and precision-guided bombs including the KAB-500 series. The P-800 Onyx, supersonic anti-ship cruise missile, Mach 2.5 terminal speed, range approximately 300 kilometers, is also certified for the type. This makes the Su-35 a credible maritime strike platform in addition to its primary air superiority role, a combination of missions that very few single-seat fighters in the world can credibly cover. The Su-35 story divides cleanly into 2 chapters separated by 20 years and a geopolitical collapse. Chapter 1, the Su-27M, 12 aircraft built between 1988 and 1995. Used for flight testing, weapons evaluation, and international demonstration tours. One of them, the aircraft fitted with thrust vectoring engines, redesignated the Su-37, defined the world's understanding of post-stall maneuvering in a production-adjacent airframe. These aircraft proved the concept. Then the money ran out. Chapter 2, the Su-35S. A completely different aircraft in everything except lineage. No canards. Redesigned structure. New AL-41F1S engines with full 3-dimensional thrust vectoring, replacing the canard's aerodynamic contribution. Completely redesigned avionics built around lessons from 15 years of Su-30 export experience. First flight, February 2008. First operational delivery, February 2014. Russia became its own launch customer, the Russian Defense Ministry ordering 48 aircraft at the 2009 MAX Air Show, driven partly by genuine operational need, and partly by the recognition that the Su-57 fifth-generation program was running years behind schedule and the Air Force could not wait for it. China's purchase in November 2015, 24 aircraft, approximately $2.5 billion, deliveries completed 2019, deserves specific attention because the motivation behind it reveals something important about what the Su-35S actually represents. China at the time was already developing the J-11D and J-16 heavy fighters, both derived from Su-27 technology under license. Why buy the Su-35S? Chinese defense analysts stated in state media, with unusual candor, the primary interest was the AL-41 F-1S engines and the Irbis-E radar as reference designs for domestic development. Russia understood this precisely and was reportedly extremely careful about the technology transfer boundaries of the contract. The operational aircraft was delivered. The full engineering data stayed in Komsomolsk-on-Amur. Egypt signed a contract for approximately 20 aircraft, but this became entangled in American CAATSA sanctions legislation, the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, which threatened U.S. financial penalties against nations purchasing significant Russian defense equipment. Egypt's need to maintain access to American military aid created a dilemma that remained unresolved into 2026. That situation is itself informative. The Su-35 is genuinely desirable to multiple nations, but purchasing it now carries geopolitical costs that did not exist a decade ago. Unit cost in recent contracts, approximately 65 deal $85 million. Below the F-35A's current US dealer $110 million per aircraft, dramatically below the F-22's final production cost of over $150 million. For nations that need a credible long-range air superiority fighter and cannot access Western fifth-generation aircraft for political or financial reasons, that price point is compelling. All of those specifications, all of that radar capability, all of those missiles, they are abstract until this question gets answered. How did the Su-35S perform when it finally met real opponents in real airspace, under real pressure, with real consequences? The answer is more complicated than either side of the debate wants to admit, and it starts in the Middle East. Russia deployed Su-35S aircraft to Syria beginning in late 2015, initially for airspace protection, providing a credible air superiority presence in an environment where coalition and Turkish aircraft were operating. The Syrian government forces had no air force capable of challenging the Su-35S, so its primary activity was patrol and escort. The encounters that attracted most attention were with American F-22 Raptors operating in the same shared airspace, encounters that produced declassified footage of Su-35S aircraft making what U.S. pilots described as unsafe approaches to coalition formations. Russian sources claimed their OLS-35 IRST sensors had successfully locked onto F-22 aircraft, detecting them passively by infrared, even when the Raptor's radar cross-section rendered it nearly invisible to conventional radar. American sources disputed the tactical significance of this. What is observable without classification is that no Su-35S was lost in Syria, no air-to-air weapons were fired by either side, and the Su-35S accumulated real operational hours in a genuine deployment that revealed its actual reliability metrics to Russian planners. Ukraine, since February 2022, has been a harsher and more revealing environment. Russian Su-35S aircraft have operated primarily in the air superiority escort role, protecting Su-34 strike aircraft approaching Ukrainian targets, and in the long-range air-to-air role, employing R-37M missiles against Ukrainian aircraft at distances that make traditional interception nearly impossible. By mid-2022, Russian Su-35S aircraft had accumulated at least 7 confirmed air-to-air victories. The R-37M proved particularly effective, engaging Ukrainian aircraft at ranges and altitudes that their crews had previously assessed as safe. Ukrainian pilots in interviews described the R-37M threat as fundamentally changing their operational calculus, not just where they flew, but how they planned every sortie. Then came a moment that no Russian planner had publicly anticipated. On a day in late 2024, a Ukrainian F-16, one of the Western-supplied jets that began arriving in meaningful numbers that year, achieved a confirmed kill against a Russian Su-35S. Ukrainian Air Force officials described it as a historic air combat victory. The Su-35 lost was confirmed through wreckage evidence and cross-referenced reporting. And in June 2025, Ukrainian forces claimed another Su-35S shot down, this time with evidence suggesting the engagement took place over Russian territory itself. a demonstration that the reach of Ukrainian air power had extended to distances that Russian aircraft had previously treated as sanctuary. Those losses demand honest analysis. They do not prove the Su-35S is a weak aircraft. They prove that in a high-density, modern, integrated air defense environment, one featuring Patriot batteries, advanced data links, and increasingly capable fighter aircraft, even a very good non-stealth fighter operating at range faces threats it cannot always detect in time. The Su-35's radar cross-section of 1 to 3 square meters frontal aspect is not a vulnerability against most opponents it will face. Against a Patriot battery operating with cueing data from NATO surveillance radars, it is a meaningful signature that can be exploited at range. That is the specific tactical reality Ukraine has demonstrated. The Su-35S versus the F-22 Raptor is not a comparison of equals, and understanding exactly why is essential to placing this aircraft correctly in the global hierarchy. The F-22 has a frontal radar cross-section estimated at approximately 0.0001 square meters, roughly the reflective area of a large marble. The Su-35's frontal RCS is 1 to 3 square meters. That difference, 10,000 to 30,000 times, means that in a beyond visual range engagement using radar-guided missiles, the F-22 can detect, track, and target the Su-35 at a range at which the Irbis-E cannot reliably detect the Raptor. The Su-35's supermaneuverability advantage is irrelevant if the engagement never closes to visual range. An American beyond visual range doctrine is specifically structured to prevent engagements from closing to visual range against opponents with superior within visual range performance. In that specific matchup, the Su-35 faces a structural disadvantage that no amount of thrust vectoring resolves. Against the F-35A, the comparison is more nuanced. The F-35 is not an aerodynamic peer of the Su-35. Its sustained turn performance at low speed is genuinely inferior, and in a close-range energy fight without missile shots available. And Su-35 with an experienced pilot holds the theoretical upper hand. But the F-35's sensor fusion, its ability to integrate data from its own sensors, data link from other platforms, and ground-based surveillance, and its low observable characteristics change the nature of any engagement so fundamentally that the aerodynamic comparison becomes largely academic. The F-35 sees first. Cueing comes from multiple sources simultaneously, and the close-range advantage of the Su-35 never gets its opportunity. Against the Eurofighter Typhoon, the comparison is genuinely competitive and depends heavily on scenario. The Typhoon is an exceptional air superiority fighter with the Captor-E ASA, excellent energy performance, and agility driven by its canard delta configuration that in some flight regimes challenges the Su-35's thrust vectoring advantage. Its Link 16 data-link integration into a NATO networked environment gives it situational awareness that an isolated Su-35 cannot match. But the Su-35's range, its raw radar power at long range against non-stealth targets, and its weapons load give it advantages the Typhoon would struggle to counter in a scenario where the engagement is not fought under full NATO command and control architecture. Against the Chinese J-16, the aircraft that most directly competes with it in the heavy fighter export market, and that Chinese engineers studied carefully after the 2015 purchase, the Su-35 holds a meaningful radar and engine advantage in current baseline configuration. The J-16 is a capable aircraft, but its WS-10 engine family does not include operational three-dimensional thrust vectoring, and its radar, while modern, has not been demonstrated at the detection ranges quoted for the Irbis-E. The Su-35S carries strengths that any serious assessment must acknowledge without qualification. Its combat range of 1,600 kilometers, extending to 3,600 kilometers with external tanks, is exceptional among non-stealth fighters and dramatically exceeds the F-22's approximately 800-kilometer combat radius without tanker support. Its Irbis-E detection range of 400 kilometers against standard fighter-sized targets gives it a genuine first-look capability against any non-stealth opponent. Its R-37M integration has already demonstrated in combat that it can threaten aircraft at ranges previously associated only with surface-to-air missile systems. Its weapons payload of 8,000 kilograms across 12 hardpoints makes it simultaneously capable of maximum air-to-air and meaningful ground attack loadouts in a single sortie. And its supermaneuverability system, when the engagement actually closes to visual range, gives the pilot a pointing advantage that no other production non-stealth fighter in the world currently matches. The weaknesses are equally real and require equal honesty. The radar cross-section of 1 to 3 square meters frontal is the fundamental strategic liability against stealth-capable opponents. Against the F-22 scenario specifically, the Su-35 is structurally outmatched before the first weapon is fired. The absence of a true AESA radar is a growing disadvantage in electronically dense environments. The Irbis-E's raw power is impressive, but its frequency agility and low probability of intercept characteristics lag behind current AESA designs. Ukraine has demonstrated that the Kibini-M ECM suite does not guarantee protection against modern integrated air defense in the way Russian doctrinal planning assumed it would. And the aircraft's losses in Ukraine, over 20 Su-35S aircraft, by early 2026 against a production rate that cannot fully replace them, reveal a sustainability problem that matters more in a sustained conflict than any single performance parameter. The Su-35S occupies a genuinely singular position in 2025 aviation. It is the last of the great non-stealth air superiority fighters, the final, fullest expression of a design philosophy that dominated combat aviation from the Korean War through the Cold War's end, built on the premise that the best fighter was the one with the most capable radar, the most maneuverable airframe, and the heaviest weapons load. That philosophy produced some of the most remarkable aircraft ever built: the F-15, the Su-27, and now, as its direct heir, the Su-35. The challenge is that the philosophical premise has been disrupted at its foundation. The introduction of genuinely low-observable aircraft has shifted the decisive parameter in beyond visual range engagements from who has the better radar to who can avoid being seen by the other's radar entirely. In that competition, the Su-35 is fighting with a fundamental disadvantage it cannot engineer away, not without becoming a different aircraft altogether, which is precisely what the Su-57 program represents. In conflicts against non-stealth opponents, the vast majority of real scenarios over the next decade, the Su-35S remains an enormously capable and credible threat. Its R-37M has already changed operational planning for air forces that fly in contested airspace over Ukraine. Its range, sensor capability, and weapons load represent the current apex of what a non-stealth, non-networked fighter can deliver. For nations that cannot access fifth-generation Western aircraft, the Su-35S is the most capable air superiority option on the market. That is not a small thing. But for Russia, the Su-35S is simultaneously the current backbone of air superiority and a bridge to a future that is arriving more slowly than planned. A bridge that is proving more expensive to maintain in Ukraine than anyone publicly anticipated. Every Su-35S lost over Ukraine is an aircraft that takes years and significant industrial capacity to replace. Every engagement where it has been successfully engaged by Patriot batteries or Ukrainian F-16s is a data point that updates Western understanding of its real operational performance in ways no airshow demonstration or manufacturer specification sheet could provide. The Snow Leopard is a formidable predator, one of the finest non-stealth fighters ever built. But in the age of stealth, even the finest predator can find itself hunted by something it cannot see. And that tension between extraordinary capability and a structural vulnerability it cannot resolve is what makes the Su-35's story one of the most interesting in modern aviation. Not because it is a failure, but because it is a masterpiece built for a world that is already changing around it. Now I want to hear your view. In a conflict without stealth fighters on the opposing side, which describes most real-world scenarios this aircraft will actually face, is the Su-35S the most dangerous fighter currently in operational service? Or has Ukraine already exposed limits that make that assessment obsolete? Leave it in the comments. Everyone gets read. If this gave you a deeper and more honest picture of one of the most debated fighters in the world today, hit like right now. Subscribe to Armies Decoded. We go further on military aviation and technology than anywhere else on YouTube. The next video is already ready for you.